Hi, this is a how-to video for a pretty simple modification to the Prusa i3 3D printer by Makerfarm. I picked up this printer used and ran into a little problem when it was time to adjust the belt for the Y-axis motor. The screws that hold the motor in had been over-tightened, and it had caused a deformity in the wooden frame that wasn't really allowing me to adjust this motor the way I needed to. The whole thing needs to slide towards the rear of the printer frame, and what's happened is those screws, when they were tightened down, have caused depressions into the wood. So when I try to retighten them in the adjusted position, they try to slide back into the depressions. It actually slides the motor back into the original position, so I'm not getting that belt adjustment that I need to do. So what I've done is I've gone ahead to the hardware store and gotten a handful of flat washers in the appropriate size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install those washers onto these screws that hold that Y-axis motor in, and that's going to spread out that load and keep those screws from falling back into those depressions that have been caused there. Also, the spreading out of the load, that ought to decrease the likelihood that those depressions will reform. The surface area for the clamping force is going to be a lot greater. It's going to be spread out over a greater area, and that ought to reduce the chances that those deformities will happen again with these washers. I think I bought this printer used, and I think that on a new one, if you were really ginger with the tightening force on those screws, you could probably avoid causing those depressions. But on this one, it had already happened, and that may be something that actually is unavoidable. I don't know how tight that motor needs to be in order to keep it from moving in those adjustment positions while it's operating. But with these washers, you ought to be able to tighten them just a little bit more without causing those deformities. And I'm going to go ahead and install them and show you what this is going to look like with those washers installed onto those screws. Okay, so here's the Y-axis motor with the washers installed on the mounting screws. I was able to get this motor adjusted into the correct position, no problem with these installed. I didn't tighten them very much. I just finger tightened them with a little bit driver. I didn't even use a driver, I just used the bit in my fingertips. I'm going to keep an eye on this and take a note of this position, and next time it's operating I'm going to make sure that's not shifting around. If it is, I'll obviously have to get those screws a little bit tighter, but again, I'm trying to avoid the issue with the deformity. It looks like there's plenty of room around all those screws throughout the adjustment range, so if need be, a larger washer could be installed there, but that's not an ideal solution, just to keep putting bigger washers. Eventually you're going to run out of room for bigger washers, and that's going to be the end of your service life for your 3D printer there. So hopefully this will stop that from happening, and we'll be good with this solution. I think that this same modification could be done to the mounting screws for the X-axis motor here. They're recessed behind this other piece here, so it's going to be a little bit trickier to install those. You may use a pair of needle nose or just disassemble this whole carriage assembly, but that's not going to be a big deal. I haven't had to adjust my X-axis motor yet, so I haven't run into any problems with that. If you really wanted to get carried away, you could do these Z-axis motors as well, and depending on your setup there, you may be able to put them on the extruder motor also. Although these motors, since there's no range of adjustment, they're just stationary on their fixtures there. So there's not really going to be as great of a need, other than just periodically retightening those as part of your routine maintenance. You shouldn't ever really have those screws in and out like you do with the motors that get adjusted there. But anyway, I hope that helps some people with the Prusa i3 by Makerfarm get their axis motors adjusted a little bit better or more accurately, and maybe prevent some damage from happening to these units in the future. This modification may be applicable to other models as well. I'm just not familiar with other 3D printers. But yeah, good luck out there, and happy making.